Hey guys, we're going to do a part of Acts chapter 13 today. We're going to do a big chunk, but there's a lot that's going on in Acts chapter 13. We're going to basically look at another sermon. And so what I think is fun, there was a few years ago that I decided I need to read through the sermons in the book of Acts to see if I can understand what the sermons in the book of Acts are about. And it actually helped me get a better idea of how to teach and how to do things like that. Now, you guys are all kids. Probably you're all kids. Can't see in the back. But you probably have to listen to some sermons, and sermons are often not as exciting as Star Wars movies, but you need to learn how to learn from sermons. And what's really interesting is we're going to read this one, and we'll talk about, well, what is he saying, and what's the point, right? Sometimes you can read like a parable, and the parable tells a story, but then you go, well, what's the point? And so those are two things. What is the thing saying? And then what is the point? We'll work on that a little bit. So if you have Bibles, you can open them up to Acts chapter 13. Acts chapter 13. Now, the last thing that we talked about last class was about Sergius Paulus, and he had that wizard sorcerer guy. And the sorcerer guy was blinded by Saul, who is now called Paul. And that bit of punishment really did a number on Sergius Paulus, so that Sergius Paulus was really, really believing. Oh, and I forgot to get my maps up and ready. And so what we have here is the next stage. They're going to leave that island, and they are going to, okay, yeah, if you guys want to look at that, you can. They're going to leave that island, and they're going to go to a new place. All right. Oh, hold on, guys. My thing is all acting funny. Come on, computer. Come on, computer. All right. Can you guys see the Bible when I shake it around? Is that what you guys are all seeing? I think that's what you're seeing. Let me start it over again. Here we go. Visualize it. All right. Now, Paul and his company set sail from Paphos and came to Perga and Pamphylia, and John departed from them and returned to Jerusalem. All right, all that to now look immediately at the map again. All right, so let's open up a map. Here we go. Zooming in. Here am I. I'm floating out in the water. All right, so here he is. He was on this island that looks like a hand pointing up towards Antioch. He was at Paphos, and he sailed from Paphos and landed in the city of Perga in the little region of Pamphylia. And that is there in the big rectangle of the sea. So let us draw that on the board. I gotta erase these. Okay, we have land going around like this. There's an island like this. We have the Nile River. You have the Dead Sea, you have the Sea of Galilee. And he left Paphos, right? And he sailed to Perga. Oh, that's not enough space. You guys can't see that. Perga. Okay, can you read Perga? Yeah, you gotta read Perga. And it's in the region, the little county state area, and we don't know exactly where those lines are, so I'm just going to draw a little circle of Pamphylia. If you want to just call it Pam because it's easier to write Pam, that's fine. So he sailed to Perga. Now, when he was there, who left? Can you remember who left? There was a guy that was with Paul and Barnabas whose name starts with a J and ends with on Mark. John Mark. John Mark leaves them and he heads back home to Jerusalem. So let's draw in Jerusalem. That's where Jerusalem is. I'm not going to go ahead and draw the name in because we kind of know that area. And I'm guessing he sailed. We don't know for sure. I don't think he flew. Maybe he rode a magical unicorn, but probably he sailed rather than traveled over land, because sailing would be a lot faster. So he headed back to Jerusalem. Okay, so that means that Paul and Barnabas, I'll underline the name Jerusalem. That means that Paul and Barnabas are by themselves. It's just the two of them. Now there's two of them, so that's good. Being two isn't bad. That doesn't mean that you're in trouble necessarily. They each have a friend with them.
Two's company, three's a crowd.
Two's company, three's a crowd. Yeah, I don't know. All right, so that's one of the, oh, come on, little thing. Focus up again. There we go. But they, passing through from Perga, came to Antioch of Pisidia. Oh my goodness, guys, we already have another place. I forgot about that. All right, so let's get to Antioch of Pisidia. And that's going to be up here. They went all the way up to Antioch of Pisidia. I'm just going to write in the word Antioch, because we don't really need to know the region names as much as the city names. Remember how we already had an Antioch that was over here? There's one Antioch that's all the way over here. Oh, you can't see what I'm doing. You can't. All right, there's an Antioch over here. And there's another Antioch over here. Okay, so you guys couldn't see what I was drawing, could you? Sorry. This is not going to be the most useful YouTube video in the world, but that's okay. So here is Antioch up here. So they landed on at the coast and they went up a little bit. All right, so that's where they're at. Okay, come on. Let's get this story started. Okay. And they went into a synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down. And after the reading of the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue said unto them, saying, Brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. So here is Paul, and here's Barnabas. And they were visiting this synagogue, and the men that were there invited them to speak. I'm holding there. It's like he's holding out his hand, saying, "Would you like to?" Oh, he's got spiky hair. I don't know why he has spiky hair. It doesn't make him look very old. I'll give him a beard so he looks older. Would you guys like to speak? Paul and Barnabas. If you have anything to say, speak on. It's almost like they're inviting them to do some preaching while they're there at the synagogue. And Paul stood up and beckoning with the hand. Oh, let's draw his hand. This is his hand beckoning, I guess. I don't know. Saying, men of Israel. Right, here's the beginning of Paul's sermon. So let's pay attention to what he says and think about what the sermon is about. Men of Israel, and you that fear God, hearken or listen. The God of this people Israel chose our fathers and exalted the people when they sojourned in the land of Egypt, and with a high arm led he them forth out of it. And for about the time of 40 years suffered he their manners in the wilderness. 40 years in the wilderness. And when he had destroyed 7 nations in the land of Canaan, he gave them their land for an inheritance for about 450 years. And after these things, he gave them judges until Samuel the prophet. Okay, have you guys heard that story before? Yeah. That's basically, he tells the story of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, First Samuel. He just summarized a whole bunch of the books of the Old Testament into just a few verses. Does that seem right? So that's the story he's telling. We can draw the little map if we want. And here is the Nile River. And we can say, here are the I'll draw the Red Sea. And then that, I can't find my eraser. Jack, give me that eraser. You stole my eraser. All right, so there is the Red Sea. And so the Israelites, they came out. I'll draw them in red. They're moving in red. They came out of Egypt and they wandered around, and then they eventually came into the land of Canaan. And that's basically the story that he's telling. And there was the time of the judges. I'll draw this guy, and he's going to be a judge. Oh, I'll make him like the old-fashioned British judge where they wear the wigs, right? I don't know how to draw those. I don't
Give
know if
him
this
the
is.
mallet.
I don't. Oh, and he's got his gavel. The mallet is called a gavel for some reason. I don't know. So he's got his little mallet hammer thing and his robes. There's a judge, and he's wearing his weird wig. And then until the time of Samuel the prophet, I'll just call him Samuel. Samuel was a judge, kind of, and Samuel was a prophet. And I'm just going to summarize all those people into that. So he told some of the story, but it really begins with God chose our fathers. God led them. He suffered them. He dealt with them. He destroyed the nations and he gave them their land. Okay, so this is a lot about what God has been doing for the people of Israel and how he's worked for them. All right, next paragraph starting in verse 21. And afterward, they asked for a king. They asked for a king. And God gave unto them Saul, the son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, for the space of 40 years. And when he had removed him, who's the he? And who was removed?
Saul.
Saul what? Saul was the he?
He was the king.
He was the king that was removed, right? So the people asked for a king. I'll draw a crown. Oh, this is the ugliest crown I ever did, Drew. Good gravy. All right, here's a crown bottom. There, let's just do a nice simple crown. And they wanted a crown, meaning they wanted a king, right? Yay for a king. And God gave them Saul. And there's Saul, and I'm going to give him that mustache. And there's Saul, the king. And eventually God removed him. God gave him the kingship, and then God removed the kingship. I don't know. That's like a hand. It's there, and then it's closing up. I don't know. Does that look like God taken away? I don't know. And he raised up David to be their king. Oh, so now we have another king, right? There is King David. All right. And I'll put David on his name, David. He rose up David to be their king, to whom he also bore witness and said, this is a cool line, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who shall do all my will. All right, so here we have some more storytelling. Paul tells the story about how the people wanted a king, and God first gave them King Saul, and he let Saul reign for a little while, and then he took away Saul and gave us David, or gave them David, didn't give us David. Here's the question. Why did God want the people to have King David? What does it say there in the text?
Because he was a really good man.
And what, yeah, that's exactly right, Allison. What's the key phrase? Not he was a good man, of course he was. What's the phrase God used? He was a man
that would serve him.
That's the idea. A man after my heart. So David has a heart, and whose heart does that look like?
God's.
Yep, you can put equal sign. He equals God's heart. Does everybody have a heart? Yes.
Of course.
Did Saul have a heart? Yes. Was Saul's heart married to God's heart? Did Saul's heart look like God's heart? Was Saul's heart like God's heart?
No.
No. And see, that's the difference. So God took away something that wasn't good enough and gave the people someone who was like him. Okay? I think that's a really important point. God gave the people someone that was like him. Was David like God in a lot of ways?
Yes.
Yeah. Was David perfect?
No.
He was not perfect.
No one's perfect.
David had some problems, didn't he? But David David really worked at being good. All right, so now let's read the next part of the sermon. Let me get my paper out. All right. Of this man's seed, okay, so that means David's children, okay? Of David's children has God, according to promise, brought forth unto Israel a Savior, Jesus. So he just said that Jesus came from whom?
God.
God brought him, and you're exactly right, but he also said that he came from David. Yeah. So if God chose David because David's heart was after God's heart, what do you think that means about Jesus? What is Jesus' heart going to be like? Yeah.
God's, because he is God.
Right. Right. But here's the interesting thing. Do you think the people who lived all the way out here, did they know very much about Jesus yet? No. This might be the first Jesus sermon they've ever heard. Isn't that interesting to think about? Maybe they've never heard a sermon about Jesus. So this is a really neat one to think about. All right, let's see what he says then about Jesus. When John had first preached before the coming baptism of repentance to all the people of Israel. Wait, who's John? Who's John? I think, did somebody say it? John the Baptist?
Yeah.
I think he's talking about John the Baptist. Do you guys, I don't have space here and time to do John the Baptist, but you can draw John the Baptist and he's eating locusts, right? You can draw him eating bugs. John had first preached before his coming, the baptism of repentance, to all people of Israel. And as John was fulfilling his course, he said, "What do you suppose that I am? I am not he, but behold, there comes one after me, the shoes of whose feet I am not worthy to unloose." Have you guys heard that before? How John said, "I'm not even important enough to work on Jesus's shoes." That's from the Gospels. So Paul is already preaching a gospel sermon using material that's going to be in the Gospels. All right. Brethren, children of the stock of Abraham, and those among you that fear God, to us is the word of this salvation sent forth. Think about that. Paul is telling, and even us today, this is true for us today. To us, the word of salvation is sent forth. The word of being saved by God is sent to you and to me. For they that dwell in Jerusalem and their rulers, because they knew him not, nor the voices of the prophets, which were read every Sabbath, fulfilled them by condemning him. Who did they condemn?
John the Baptist.
He's moved past John the Baptist.
Oh, yeah.
He's into Jesus. The Jewish people and the rulers fulfilled the promise that Jesus was going to be killed. So they condemned him. And though they found no cause of death in him, yet they asked Pilate that he should be slain, that he should be killed. And when they had fulfilled all things that were written of him, they took him down from the tree and laid him in a tomb, but God raised him from the dead. All right, guys, guess what picture we're going to draw? We draw it all the time, don't we? Because this is what the gospel is. And I'll tell you what, guys, every time I draw it, I like drawing this picture more and more. I just think it's really neat. What did he call the cross in this sermon?
The tree.
Called it a tree.
Well,
Isn't that interesting?
It is a tree.
It was
It's
probably made out of a tree from wood.
Right. It's made out of a tree. It's made out of wood. But there's also an Old Testament law about cursed is any man who is hung on a tree. And so by calling the cross a tree, he's making all the people think, wait a minute, wasn't there a law or a rule about that? And they could look it up in their Bibles and they could learn even more about Jesus. And so he's making another little point there. I think that's so cool. All right, so here is the tomb that God, I need to make that arrow look right, that God raised him from the dead. And think about this. All the people who live all the way out here, Paul says, God raised them from the dead. And they say, how can I believe that? How do I believe that? I don't know if I can believe that. Is that a good, I mean, like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's hard to believe if you haven't seen it, right? Look at what the next thing Paul says. God raised him from the dead, and he was seen for many days of those that came up with him from Galilee to Jerusalem, who are now his witnesses unto the people. How can I believe it? Guess what? Witnesses saw it. A lot of people saw Jesus alive, and you can ask them about it. Does that make sense? So this is a sermon about how somebody can believe in Jesus for the first time. And we bring you good tidings. Some of your translations might have the word good news. And what is good news?
Good tidings.
Gospel.
Gospel. That's the gospel. So is this a gospel sermon? Yeah. If it's about the gospel, it's a gospel sermon. And we bring you good tidings of the promise made to our fathers, how that God has fulfilled the same unto our children, in that he raised up Jesus. As also it was written in the second Psalm, and here it quotes the Psalms, you are my son, this day I have begotten thee. If you guys look up Psalm number 2, and Psalm number 2 is pretty easy to find because it's just the second one in the book of Psalms, you'll see that line, this day I have begotten you. And as concerning him that he raised him up from the dead, now no more to return to corruption, he has spoken in this wise. I will give you the holy and sure blessings of David. That's from Isaiah chapter 55, verse 3. And actually, that was in my sermon yesterday. And when I was preaching it yesterday, I didn't remember that it was here in Acts. And I thought that was really cool when I was getting ready for this class. Because he says also in another psalm, you will not give your Holy One to see corruption. What does the word corruption mean in this sentence? I want to stop there for a moment. You will not let your Holy One see corruption.
Bad things.
Corruption can mean bad things, but it doesn't mean it here.
God can't be near sin.
That's another way of looking at it, but that's not the specific one here. Corruption here is an old-fashioned word for something. I'll say it this way. What happens to a body when you put it under the ground?
Turns into dirt.
It rots, right?
Yes.
You will not let your Holy One to see corruption or rottenness. Does that make sense? When they put Jesus in the tomb, what did he look like? He came out fine, right? Did he come out like a skull and bones?
No.
No, he didn't
No.
see corruption. He didn't rot. He didn't waste away. This is similar to what Peter says in Acts chapter 2. For David, after he has gone to his own generation, served the counsel of God, fell asleep, and was laid unto his fathers and saw corruption. Did David get buried? Yes.
Yeah.
Did David turn into an ookie and bones and gross?
No.
Yeah.
Yes, he did,
Oh, yeah.
because he's a human body. Did Jesus do that?
No.
He
No.
was raised from the dead, an empty tomb. But he whom God raised up saw no corruption. Jesus didn't rot. Be it known unto you, therefore, brethren, that through this is a cool line, through this man is proclaimed unto you remission of sins, and by him everyone that believes is justified from all things from which you could not justify yourself by the law of Moses. So basically, Paul here says, because of Jesus, I'm drawing Jesus a whole bunch of times, right? Here's Jesus. Because of him, you can have remission of sins, and you can be justified. Those are two big Bible ideas. What does it mean to be remission of sins? Let's talk about these two ideas, and then we'll be almost done. What's remission of sins?
It's like
Get forgiven for sins.
Because of Jesus,
Forgiveness.
your sins are taken from you, pretty much. Or,
Yeah, sins are taken from you. Somebody said forgiveness.
Yeah.
And so I'll write that in blue. Forgive. Forgiveness is a big thing, right? If you do a terrible thing, raise your hand if you've ever done something wrong.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Allison. But you can be forgiven, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be justified? They're very similar. I have a hard time of making a difference between the two sometimes.
Just
Mm.
being good, like being made good, or made
Yeah.
holy, kind
How'd you know that?
of.
And made holy? Good grief. Maybe y'all should be the teachers. Made good and made holy. Because here's something. If I walk around and I see one of you guys, I go, hey, and I punch you in the face. And I say, oh, wait, oh, please forgive me. Do you forgive me?
Yeah.
Try.
Okay, you try. Okay. But yeah, let's say you forgive me. Let's say you forgive me. Oh, thank you for forgiving me. But
And then he
you
did.
think you might say in your mind, you know, I forgive Mr. Dan, but I'm going to be really scared the next time I see him,
Yeah.
right? And you should feel that way. If I just and I'm punching people, yeah, I mean, ugh. But that justified, being made right, that's what God does with us. Now, we still might make mistakes, and we still have to really work at it and try and do all those sorts of things. But when God justifies us, it's like he is giving us that strength and making us right and holy. I'm not right and holy because I'm really cool. No, I'm not really cool. I'm the guy who punches people in the face. But because of God, I can be made justified. Isn't this exciting? Forgiveness,
Yeah.
justification, all those Old Testament rules. There's a lot of Old Testament rules, right? And if you break one rule, guess what? You're a rule breaker. You are. Forever. Because you broke one. Can you do anything to be a not rule breaker anymore?
No.
No.
Except for
Because
go
you're a
back-
rule breaker. But now with God can do this work for us. He can make us right. He can lift us up. All right, let's go back to reading and we will finish this section. I don't think there's very much. All right. Because of Jesus, it's proclaimed unto you the remission of sins, and by him everyone that believes is justified from all things, from which you could not justify yourselves by the law of Moses. There's more to the law of Moses than the 10 Commandments, but I'm going to draw the 10 Commandment stones, right? That like is the law. So under the law of Moses, there's going to be lots of failure and crying, right? But now with Jesus, we can be made justified and right. We're excited about it. All right. Beware, therefore, lest that come upon you, which was spoken of in the prophets. Let me put this side. Behold, you despisers, and wonder and perish, for I work a work in your days, a work which you shall in no wise believe, if one declare it unto you. He ends his sermon with, beware. And he quotes it from, it's actually in Habakkuk that this comes from. And God tells us through the prophet Habakkuk that God was going to do something that no one would believe. that God was going to send his own son and kill his own son so that we can have forgiveness of sins. And Paul is saying, you beware, you watch out. Oh, I moved it. That you listen to this sermon. That's what he's basically saying. Paul is preaching this sermon to a bunch of Jewish people in the synagogue. I'll move over so you guys can see the screen or the board behind me. To a bunch of people in that synagogue saying, this is the new message. This is the new gospel. These are the great things. Now you listen and beware. Learn the lesson. Okay, so I'm going to review it right now. What was this sermon about? Okay, well, in the sermon, he talked about the history of the Israelites leaving and going into the land of Canaan, and the judges and Samuel. Okay, there's some history. Then he told them about they wanted a king, and he gave them Saul, and then he took away Saul, and they gave him King David. And what was the good thing about King David? King David was
like God in his heart.
like God in his heart. Good job. A man after God in his heart. And then the rest of the, he wasn't what?
He wasn't judging people out. Like, he wasn't a mean king. He was a very kind king.
He was a kind king. That's right. And then he moves immediately into saying that David had a great grandson, Jesus. And Jesus, like David, is a man after God's own heart. He died because the people killed him, but God raised him from the dead. So someone with a heart like David, who is somebody that God chose, died, but was raised, and he didn't rot in the grave. He's really alive. And the message about Jesus is, even though you got messed up because of all the laws and you've done things wrong in your life, through Jesus, you can have forgiveness. That's the things that he said in the sermon. What do you think is the point? What's the lesson? What does Paul want you and me to think about today?
Getting forgiveness.
Getting forgiveness.
Knowing that God is real.
Knowing that God is real. Anybody on the internet have ideas?
Getting saved.
Being saved? Yeah. And who do we get all the... Say what?
Caring for others and being selfless.
Yeah, caring for others and being selfless. And really the big point of this sermon is you can get all of these good, helpful, needed things through Jesus. Absolutely through Jesus. You can trust Jesus. Jesus is the one. I should write his name. The great things in life and the great things that last longer than life itself are found in Jesus. I think that that's the point of this sermon. Okay. Do you guys have any questions before we close out? No? All right. Well, guys, thanks a bunch. Next class, we'll see. Oh, he just got done with the sermon. I wonder what they all think about it. And we'll see. Now, you are allowed to cheat. You're allowed to read the Bible before my class. Wait, that's not cheating. That's just being, yeah, read the Bible. All right. I'll see you guys later. Take care.